Welcome to the IDPro Show, your hub for all things about digital identity as a career. So I'm Heather Flanagan, Executive Director of IDPro and Principal Editor for their body of knowledge.
I'm Alex Babeanu. Yeah, CTO at 3 Edges.
And I'm your other host, Chris Cochran, here to talk to an exceptional person about their journey through identity. Welcome to the show, Alex.
Thank you.
So Alex is a founding member of IDPro. He's a newsletter contributor. He's a body of knowledge reviewer. He's a CTO. He's a technologist. He is like amazing with doing all the things. So I've got to know, Alex, how on earth did you get here?
Oh, wow. How long do we have? Well, yeah, it's interesting. Like it all started with wow. Where did it start? I didn't start with identity, obviously. I mean, I'm not sure if many people start with identity.
Nobody does.
I wanted to do AI back in the 90s and couldn't find work. Can you imagine that? I studied AI at school, robotics even. There's no job for me, and I had to take like the first IT, even vaguely IT related job I could, which was asset management. It's completely boring, like keeping track of PCs and printers and that kind of stuff. After studying, how the mind works, looking after printers was kind of a letdown. Anyway, managed to eventually get hired by PeopleSoft back then, and when I joined their dev team, they wanted to do something which was quite innovative in the early 2000s, which was connecting to LDAP and creating a provisioning tool to LDAP. I had no idea what any of these words meant back then. So they had me buy the LDAP Bible, a book that I still own, actually. Read a bunch of it, and that's how I got started into identity.
Was there a specific point in time where you felt like, I am an identity person, right? Because we talk about there aren't many people that say, you know what, I'm going to get into technology to be an identity person. Was there a moment where you were like, you know what, this is what I do? Was there a specific story you could tell?
Yeah, when Oracle acquired PeopleSoft, so probably 2005 or six thereabouts, I joined their Oracle Identity Manager dev team, so building pieces of OIM. And that's where I thought, okay, now I probably am an identity person. Kind of stuck here, but it's okay. I kind of liked it. My earliest kind of explorations in AI were about how to explain identity, actually, like how the brain works, what makes us, how do we work, kind of thing. I don't think we'll ever have the answer to that, but yeah. So I kind of liked the field and stayed in it, I guess. But that's when it really started to kick in that I'm an identity person.
So one of the things I am coming from some background knowledge of you, and I know one of the things that's really got your attention these days is authorization. That's a mighty big field to try and describe in 30 minutes or less. Why is that exciting? Why is that where of all the aspects of identity that are possible, why is that the one that got you?
Well, let's see. It also came kind of organically. We were I was in consulting for about 10 years before doing 3 Edges. A lot of the more interesting projects or challenges I've seen in the field were related to authorization. It's never easy. There's no currently, I mean, although we're kind of trying to do something, but there's no standard for it. I mean, there are standards that are mostly ignored from my experience. No offense to, I won't cite names, but they know anyway. And it's always been the challenge, like the complexity of it. Like, interestingly, it was in the IoT world that it all started with authorization. Some IoT vendors have hundreds of millions of essentially identities, which are smart devices spread out worldwide. And these things can connect to the internet, upload telemetry data, connect to each other, connect to web services, and of course you have the people that need to connect to them. How do you handle that at scale worldwide? We needed to go well beyond uh, what we used to do up to that point, which was essentially roles and LDAP. And
Right.
so that's where it started to get interesting. Like we need to find new technology, namely graphs at that point, and find new ways of doing it, or of making it work. This was like probably in 2014, 2015, thereabouts. So that's what got me, that the challenge and the uh, all the new stuff that was required in order to solve the problems.
What would you say is one of the things that people get wrong the most when it comes to authorization?
Uh, well, they okay, couple of things. They keep using what they know, which is not necessarily wrong, but it could lead to problems, like especially since you've been using roles since 1992. So that leads into role explosion problems.
Hmm.
And then developers do their own kind of sauce on their side. They have a requirement for authorization and they build their own thing. At the end of the day, nobody knows who has access to what, just because everything's in specific apps, and it's really hard to have a central view and and know what happens if there's a data breach, because we don't know what that user had access to.
Hmm.
So those are kind of two main things.
I want to ask the stupid question because I'm really good at those.
Nice.
Is
Me
there
too.
a difference between access control and authorization?
Well, that's a good one. I've been struggling with that one myself, actually.
That's why this is my superpower, because I sure sounded like a stupid question to me.
I
Like,
don't think so.
Access management, for some reason, sounds a bit more generic to me, but then what would that encompass? Maybe also authorization is part of access control.
Hmm.
I mean, authentication. Sorry. Maybe. I mean, you manage. To be honest, I'm not entirely sure. I'd have to
Yeah.
look at a definition. In my sense, it includes authentication as well, because you're managing the access to your system. So you have
Hmm.
to authenticate someone and authorize them.
Yep.
To me, it's kind of both. Um, I might be wrong. There might be others that have different definitions.
No, I like that. I like that a lot because yeah, I mean, the authentication is saying, okay, this is who I am. If I'm going to a private party, hey, this is me for sure, but you might not be authorized to come in. You can authenticate all you want to, right?
Yeah,
So I would say,
exactly.
yeah, it's definitely like a subset of access.
Or there's that private VIP room in the back
Hmm.
where
Yep. Right.
where you can't
There's
really
levels to it.
access, especially because they know who you are.
Yeah. Exactly. What would you say, Heather?
I'm not, I mean, I can see the point of saying access control is the entire process, and yet authorization is distinct from authentication for a very darn good reason, right? They need to be two separate things. Um, and the whole point, I mean, for me, one of the most important things about the whole digital identity space is the fact that, you're no matter what you do, if you're in an industry where your whole purpose is identity verification, because that's what you do, you're still doing it so that your customers can authorize the person coming in, that they have clearly identified this person and that they can therefore get access to whatever the thing is. So, I think access control, access management is, friendlier,
Hmm.
but I
Kind of,
think
yeah,
authorization is the root of what that is and what you're doing.
yeah. That's a good one. Access. I didn't. Yeah, I guess access control may be friendlier. So maybe more of a and user friendly term. That's good to know.
Yeah. I like that.
I'm not as worried about the end users as I am. The people I worry about most is the project managers.
Right.
Mm.
Honestly, it's making sure that they understand just enough of the projects that they have to deal with, that they understand the terms and why they're important. They have so much influence, not usually authority, but they have a lot of influence to
Hmm.
get things done. So keeping the terms clear for that audience is super important.
Yeah,
Super important.
absolutely. I like it. Access control, authorization. Yeah, I can see that. So how would you call the whole authentication and authorization as a whole? Is that just identity and access management, or
That's IAM, baby.
that's
Yeah.
IAM?
Yeah.
Well, to me, IAM includes like provisioning and governance and all of that as well.
Well, you
For
never
sure.
do any one of them for its own sake, right? You're always
Yeah.
you're the whole life cycle is for a purpose, right?
Yep.
You're right. IAM is there's a lot of different components that you can specialize in if you really want to. If you want to specialize in authentication, let me introduce you to the concept of passkeys, because everybody loves passkeys right now, right? And it's like
Oh
you
yeah.
can really sink your teeth into it.
Hmm.
Mhm.
But you might want to sink your teeth into authorization and the whole control over access, at which point my brain melts down a little bit, because now it's like, okay, well, what kind do you want? Policy-based access control? Do you want role-based access control? Do you want
Well,
attribute-based access control? And now suddenly you've
Mhm.
got all of these areas of specialization. So it's a
yeah.
it's a wonderful little nest of things.
I mean, speaking of what you're bringing up right now is almost like a difference of flavor, right? But when we're talking about someone coming into the field of identity and saying like, oh, wow, this is a field that I can work at. This is a field that I could move up in. Alex, from your perspective, what are some of the most important skills or concepts that you think people coming into the space today should really focus on?
So, in my experience, it helps if you're a developer because
Hmm.
at some point you will be asked to code something, even if it's just a little script
Right.
here and there. System administration has been probably one of the most important skills. You have to spend a lot. I mean, in my experience, again, everything is cloud based now, but still, you need to understand, what a proxy is, or a VM runs, and be able to run some simple Linux commands at least.
Yep.
To even stand up the systems you're supposed to manage, administer, configure, and all of that. So those two things I think are key. If you're technical, now if you're not technical, at least an understanding of the challenges behind identity, and like what are you trying to solve as a problem. Um,
Hmm.
why is it important to know who's who, and that kind of stuff. But I'm more of a technical guy, so I
Yeah, of
mean, from
course.
my standpoint, definitely need to know your some sysadmin and some dev development stuff. It helps if you do some, if you can know some DevOps stuff. Does definitely help, especially with all these cloud cloud business we have to deal with. Like you have to deploy in cloud infrastructures and all of that. So kind of low level, actually middleware is where it's
Yeah.
at.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Chris, does that align with how you learned about identity?
Uh, yes, it is actually. Funny enough, so I started in the United States Marine Corps and I was at the National Security Agency. So I kind of skipped a bunch of steps. And funny enough, I actually took a role as a help desk person to kind of go back to the beginning, learn how to set up Active Directory for organizations and things like that. So I kind of started with the high level stuff and then had to work my way back to the trenches and then kind of rebuild my career that way. And then I went off to do threat intelligence and leading security operations and engineering. So I would say, yeah, I kind of skipped a bunch of steps, started with intelligence, and then I had to go back to the very beginning.
Wow. Yeah, for me it was down from the nitty gritty details upward. So it was bottom up, pretty much.
Yeah.
Starting with okay, integrate with LDAP. Okay, where's my driver?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So very interesting, different ways, right?
Very different ways, very different ways. And, speaking as the librarian in the room, it's everybody comes at this from really different directions.
What
I
about you,
certainly
Heather?
did the same.
Actually, I'm
Yeah,
curious
that
about that.
I'm a
Yeah.
library. So my background is medieval English history and library science.
Wow.
Yep. But when I graduated with my master's in library science, I ended up working for a new ISP, a new internet service provider, and they were desperate for people who were reasonably intelligent, because there was no one you could hire at that point.
Mhm.
And so, and this is for the uh, more mature people in the crowd. Yes, I was a Galacticom bulletin board system operator. That's how I started.
Wow.
And that lasted for 3 whole months, because it was the mid-90s. And then it went to, oh, wow, could you just take over our DNS system? And I'm like, I don't know what that is, but do you have a book that describes it?
Yeah.
And they said, sure. And they gave me the O'Reilly Cricket book. And like, that's how I, in
Mm.
a way. So yes, once I got into tech, which is not where I intended to be, it was starting at that ground level of how do computers work? How do networks work? How do you replace the darn memory chips in Sun Microsystem machines? All of that was
Wow.
in the world of what I did, with my O'Reilly library next to me as I was trying to figure out DNS. And then they threw SendMail at me, which I'm pretty convinced broke me for coding for the rest of my life. And, going from there, it also was the start of course, if you're doing that, you have to know who's accessing your systems. You have to create accounts. You have to provision them to use sudo, because you don't want everybody to have root access. Matter of fact, you don't want to have anybody to have root access.
Right.
All of these kinds of control mechanisms were just fundamentally part of the job. I didn't consider myself an identity person. I actually have never considered myself an identity person. It's just a natural progression of actually working in tech. You have to understand access.
Yeah.
You're an identity person to me.
Yeah. Okay.
Honestly, I think of myself more as a standards person.
Mm.
Who happens to have a focus on digital identity, but I think of it a little bit differently than that, because I don't implement anything, and I certainly don't code anything, but I
Right.
organize all the people working in that space. So different perspectives.
I'd love to hear from both of you, because I feel like we're at a interesting phase in the world of identity. It's becoming the new hotness, right? It seems like every other day is, the identity is the new hotness, but identity has been around for a long, long time, right? How have some of the culture and the community of identity changed over time, and are you seeing something more recently that makes it really, really interesting? Let's start with you, Alex.
Well, recently, what I see is the amount of data breaches. Like, there's no week that comes by that hasn't a
Right.
new data breach. Like, we've heard some very popular ones, or popular in that lot of, unfortunately, a lot of impact.
Mhm.
So that's becoming kind of prevalent now. The organized crime is organizing in like basically business-like organizations that are very specialized, and they collaborate together. And that threat is really kind of new from the last few years, I guess. It wasn't to that scale before, from what I've seen. So now there's really like a lot of pressure on us access control to ensuring that everybody has only the right access that they need to have, as well
Right.
as you know to make sure we limit the splash radius of these data breaches, which seem inevitable. I don't know.
Mm.
I mean, it's all about social engineering these days, and it seems
Mhm.
like humans are the weakest link now. As
Yeah.
much as we can write clever code, can't rewire the brains yet. Um,
Mhm.
and so we have to account for that,
I don't know. You're gonna have to dust off your old AI skills, because
I
they're
guess.
they're gonna be really important.
Yeah.
What about you, Heather? What changes have you seen?
You know, I do wonder, to a certain extent, how much, so is the identity space growing as an industry and as a career option? Yes, absolutely. But is it growing as much as we think it is? I kind of question that, and here's why.
Mm.
Um, I because I actually think of myself more as a standards person, trying to look at the bigger trends and what's happening in technology, and where standards might be able to help. I track magazines. I track what's happening,
Mm.
the Register, which is glorious for snark and English humor and tech news. I also track Forbes. And, I track a handful of these kinds of, just not necessarily tech magazines, but even Fast Company or Wired or whatnot. How many articles do you see on digital identity?
Mm.
Almost none. It's
Right.
Yeah,
not a
true.
thing that they're talking about. It's not a thing, is it the cause of breaches? Absolutely, and it's infuriating, but it's still, yeah, that was the cause, but that's still not enough to make the identity topic one that's really going to be promoted in the same way that cybersecurity is a sexy topic. AI, absolutely a sexy topic. Digital identity, it's not a sexy topic. It's critical, but it's not really pulling the people in and the attention in and the resources in that we need it to.
And you absolutely see that when people ask you what you do for a living. You're like, okay, when you log in, it kind of starts that way.
Yeah. Now, Chris, I'm gonna suggest that you might have a different perspective because you're working for a company that's really up and coming.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I would say that it's part of that wave. I mean, of course, Will Lynn, he's our CEO. He had been interested in identity because he comes from the VC world, and he saw like this trend. He's a pattern matcher, and so he saw a trend in
We're going to pause for a
identity.
minute. When you say VC world, are you saying venture capital or verifiable credentials?
Oh yeah, yeah. That good question. Venture capital. Yeah.
Okay.
So he'd run a bunch of companies in the I realm as a venture capitalist, and now he's seeing that like, hey, there's this whole gaping hole that's kind of happening right now. The reason why I probably see it is like this change in the environment is because now CISOs and other security practitioners are now really focused on identity because they're saying, oh yeah, we're having a lot of problems because the identities is really the that inflection point for a given breach, for example, or a given incident. And so now you're seeing that the CIO and the CISO, they're having to have conversations because on the operational side is usually on the IT front, they're having to manage, they're dealing with entitlements and things like that. But now you see on the security side that is becoming important to secure the identities. It's being important to keep over provisioning from happening, right? And so you're having this song and dance between IT and security, which historically they haven't had the best relationship. Sure, there are people out there that have figured it out and there are teams that work really well together, but that's not always the case. But now you have this identity sort of challenge that you bring to an organization where the IT leaders and managers and the security IT or security leaders and managers need to work together to honestly solve one of the toughest technical issues that an organization can face.
Yeah. Yeah, very true. And yeah, actually, now that you mentioned it, it's true they didn't talk to each other back then. I've seen it.
Yeah.
The ID team is over there, and to access anything, they talk to IT team over there, and they don't want to. And yeah.
I used to work at in research and education, and the universities that I worked for, it'd be like just watching this pendulum of the identity group swings into the security department, and then it swings back into HR, and then it swings back into the security department, and then it swings over to administration, and then it swings back into the it's a kind, you could just almost set your calendar by the fact you're gonna go into the security department and then get kicked out of the security department.
Nobody wants us.
Yeah.
Where's the love?
That's kind of my point too. And it's funny because I was leading the security operations team, and I was in charge of setting up corporate security. So everything internal to the organization. And ownership is a tough thing because you would think some people from the outside would think, oh man, wouldn't everybody want to own as much as possible? Absolutely not. We had a hard time for having people take ownership of servers, let alone an entire program that's very complex. So, I mean, would you all say it's the same thing? Everybody's just kind of say, hey, I don't want to own identity. Like, I mean, sure, there are those mature organizations where they have an IAM team, but for a tight team that might have a few people on IT and maybe one or two people on security, nobody wants to own identity outright.
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen that with a client actually over here a few years ago. Yeah, they basically called me in and they didn't have anybody. They had servers that were still running Windows NT, I think, that nobody kind of owned or didn't want to touch because for fear of breaking stuff. And it was really hard to bridge the gap between developers and the IT folks who were like old timers that were doing this, that had been doing this forever. And yeah, you could see that there was not even a team that was doing identity, so they were kind of lost to what to do, and yeah, quite challenging. I'm hoping that's kind of a unique case. I haven't seen many of those, but for sure, I hope it happens less now. Let's put it this way.
I think the pendulum can almost be defined as, within a company, the demand for security because something happened, a breach happened, a failed audit happened. But what makes it swing back is the demand for convenience. HR insisting you are slowing down onboarding people, and this is entirely unacceptable. We're taking it
Right.
back, right? And it's like which is causing the most pain? Your lack of security or your lack of convenience? Because in 9 times out of 10, you can't have both.
Yeah, very good point. Actually, I spoke about this at Identiverse during COVID. Even like the more security you have, the more friction you have, and
Mm-hmm.
striking the right balance is kind of an art.
Yeah. Big time.
Yeah,
It's the art of balance.
so it was all
Absolutely.
about user journeys. Like you need to adapt your security journey for every user based on what they need to access. So you kind of need some clever access control there as well.
Mm-hmm. Alex, as we come to a close on this episode, I'm thinking about the folks, not only people that are just coming into identity, but even the journey folks that have been in there for a little bit and they want to kind of move to that next level. What is that one piece of advice that you would have for someone working on identity to really stand out, amongst the sea of other identity practitioners?
Well, what would it be? I guess really understand the standards. Heather, I'm sure you agree. uh, and then try and find the best way to. I mean, the standards are there to make all these various systems interoperate. And so,
Mm-hmm.
if you manage to get a vision that is global enough to encapsulate all these systems and to bring it higher up in that sense, like a conceptual view of the enterprise, or even how the enterprise interacts with the outside world or the organization. Not necessarily could be a public organization. So I guess understanding that higher level, like stepping up in the sense of getting away from the nitty gritty details and understanding why we're doing the standards and how they interoperate and what we could do to make this better, this communication better.
Mm-hmm.
That would be,
Love it.
yeah.
I didn't even
No,
pay him to
hey,
say standards.
standards. Hey, if people
Well,
need to look into it. It might
yeah.
be an interesting space for somebody. But Alex, thank you so much from the bottom of our hearts for hopping on the mics with us to hang out and chat about all things identity. Thank you to everybody that's watching and listening. It means the world to us. And definitely thank you to IDPro and AKA Identity for allowing Heather and I to go on this incredible journey and discovering all the incredible people and facets of identity and being able to bring that to the rest of the community. And with that, we will see everyone next time.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, everybody.